Welcome back in. Today we're discussing our Week 15 waiver wire ads for the week. Now, obviously, fantasy playoffs are here, so but we had some little bit of a brutal today, especially with quarterbacks, tons of quarterback injuries. But let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to start with our top streaming options of the week, and we're going to start with Marcus Mariota. Jane Daniels returned today, but was re-injured in the third quarter and did not return. You have to believe at this point that he will be shut down for the rest of the season. Mariota should once again be back under center. Mariota in games he started the season as average 18.3 fantasy points per game, which should be good for QB 12 overall this season. Next up, though, for the Commanders is a road matchup against a Giants defense that allows the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So Mariota is probably the top streaming option and just overall just best matchup for any quarterback on this slate. So you also love that Mariota you obviously brings something with his legs as well. So I think Mariota, as far as quarterbacks that are widely available, I think is the best quarterback play. Now, next up is going to be C.J. Stroud. Stroud completed 15 of 31 for 203 yards and a score for 13 fantasy points against the Chiefs. Nothing overly impressive, but Stroud now heads home where he has been significantly better. He's for his career. He's averaging 260 passing yards and nearly 2 touchdowns per game. And now they get to face a reeling Cardinals defense. The Cardinals so far this year are allowing almost 250 passing yards and nearly 2 touchdowns per game to opposing quarterbacks. So I think Stroud is actually a pretty strong play in Week 15. Let's move over to Tyler Shook. Now, the legend of Tyler Shook continues to grow after another strong fantasy performance today against the Bucs. While it wasn't a banner day through the air, completing just 13 of 20 passes for 143 yards for 144 yards and a pick. However, on the ground, he rushed 7 times for 55 yards and had 2 touchdowns. He finished with 22 fantasy points. He's now scored 18 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Now the Saints will return home to take on the Panthers. This is not necessarily the best matchup for quarterbacks as they allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to the position. But as we have seen, Shook already dice up this defense for 282 yards and 2 touchdowns for 19 fantasy points in Week 10. So I think Shook is at least should be on people's radars, especially if you're absolutely desperate for a quarterback. Next up is going to be, I want to talk about a Shedeur Sanders. Sanders had a monster day today against the Titans. He completed 23 of 42 for 364 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He also added 3 rushes for 29 yards and another score for 34 fantasy points. This was by far the most encouraging start for the rookie quarterback. Now the Browns head to Chicago to take on a Bears defense that actually allows the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think Sanders is more of a middle-of-the-road QB2 this week. A couple other guys I want to mention. First, I have Trevor Lawrence on here, but if he's available in your league, he's probably definitely worth a look. But he's rostered in 58% of Yahoo leagues, which is typically something I don't really talk about. But if he's sitting out there, Lawrence has been on a heater recently, scoring 19 or more fantasy points in 3 straight games, and as well as 4 times over his last 6 games. The Jags will take on a Jets defense that allows the 13th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And then lastly, Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers had a solid day today against the Ravens. He completed 23 of 34 for 284 yards and a touchdown. The old man also had a rushing touchdown, and he ended with 21 fantasy points. Next up, though, is a home matchup against the Dolphins, who do allow the 9th most fantasy points to quarterback. So I do think you can look at Aaron Rodgers, but again, we probably have to be pretty desperate, especially in the fantasy playoffs, to be starting Aaron Rodgers. So lastly, let's keep it moving here, and let's move over to the running back position. First, I want to hit on is Blake Corum. I refuse to really believe that Blake Corum is actually available in any 12-team league, but it shows he's only rostered in 32% of Yahoo leagues and just 22% of ESPN leagues. However, I did look over on Sleeper, and he has rostered 89% of leagues over there. So I don't know why there's such a wide gap between those sites. In other words, I get it with Yahoo and ESPN. You probably have a lot of dead leagues and stuff in there because people will just jump on there and just draft to draft, and they create leagues off that. But still, it seems widely there should not be that big of a gap. And Corum had a monster day today, so if he's available in your league, he needs to be added. And at this point, he's now scored 14 or more PPR points in back-to-back games, and he has taken over a significant role from Kyron Williams. And he's not just somebody that I think is even a handcuff anymore. He's now somebody that really is in the flex play territory. Next up is going to be Jalen Wright. Devon Achane exited in the first half with a rib injury and did not return. Well, I think most would have thought Ollie Gordon would be the next man up. I would have been wrong because it was Jalen Wright. He ended up with 24 carries for 107 yards and a touchdown for 16 PPR points. Now, after the game, McDaniel, the head coach, came out and did say that Achane possibly could have returned, in an emergency situation, but obviously they had the game well in hand, didn't need to. So this is obviously going to be a situation we're going to need to monitor with a rib injury. I They should know by now if it's a break or anything like that. If he does have a broken rib, then he probably has a chance of missing week 15. But we'll have to wait and see. Either way, if he were to miss, Jalen Wright would be a solid RB2 play next week against the Steelers. But again, this is certainly something you're going to want to monitor before you go out and spend like heavy fab or whatever you have left, or a heavy waiver priority to add Jalen Wright. So let's keep moving here. Let's move over to Chris Rodriguez. Rodriguez rushed 10 times for 52 yards for just 5.2 fantasy points today. He once again didn't draw a single target. This is going to make him touchdown dependent. The good news is though, he scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 7 games, and he should have a strong chance this week against arguably the worst run defense in the league in the Giants. The Giants have allowed 125 rushing and a touchdown per game to opposing running backs. They've allowed the second most PPR points to running backs this year. I think Chris Rodriguez is probably going to be a low end RB2 or a high end RB3 this week. And despite the blowout, like once you got to the third quarter, Chris Rodriguez had basically handled about 75% of the opportunities in the backfield. It wasn't until the second half whenever they finally relinquished, and we saw JCM take some touches from there. But I think it's a really positive sign either way for Chris Rodriguez, and that he does get a fantastic matchup. So if you're looking for a flex option, Rodriguez might be the guy you're looking for. Next up is going to be Devin Singletary. Much like Blake Corum, it seems hard to believe that Devin Singletary is only rostered 24% of Yahoo leagues, especially with Tyrone Tracy going down with an injury before their bye week. As things stand, Tyrone Tracy did say he should be fine before their bye. Either way, Singletary has averaged 15.3 touches and scored 17 or more PPR points in 2 of his last 3 games. Singletary needs to be rostered in all 12-team leagues, and as well as 10-team leagues with a little bit deeper benches. And next up is obviously a matchup against the Commanders defense that actually allows the 3rd most PPR points to running back. So whether Tyrone Tracy plays or not, Singletary needs to be rostered. It is a valuable flex play next week. Let's keep moving. I want to hit on is Rasheen Ali for the Ravens. He's only rostered in 3% of leagues. Keith Mitchell left with a knee injury after ripping off a 55-yard run. Rasheen Ali will now be the number 2 running back and the pass-catching back. Next up, though, is a matchup against the Bengals, who have been terrible against opposing running backs. They have allowed the most fantasy points for running backs this year. So I do think Ali is at least worth a look in deeper 12-team leagues. And then Dylan Sampson, I think in PPR formats, he saw 6 targets today, had a pretty decent game. I think in trailing game script, you're going to see Sampson be the pass-catching running back. And it's been a positive that Shador Sanders has been willing to check down to his running back. So Sampson, at least, I think it's at least worth a bench spot in 12-team leagues and PPR leagues. So let's keep moving here, and let's move over to the wide receiver position. And we're going to start with this actually list looks very similar to last week, because first we're going to talk about is Luther Burden. With Rome Odunze out, Luther Burden caught 4 of 6 targets for 67 yards for just 10 PPR points. Burden did lead the team in targets, catches, and yards. Obviously not a monster day, but the use was encouraging, especially against a very good defense of the Packers. If Odunze, who is dealing with a stretch fracture in his foot, misses week 15, I think Luther would be a wide receiver 3 against a Browns defense. It looks like it also will be without Denzel Ward, who left the game today in that game. So Luther Burden, I know it wasn't a huge day for him. He didn't kill you if you had to plug him in, but I think better days are ahead. So I do like Luther Burden, who's, again, shocked that he's only rostered in 17% of leagues after all the hype that was surrounding him this week, once Rome Odunze was ruled out. So let's keep moving over to Jaden Reed. Reed did nothing special in his first game back. He finished with 4 catches for 31 yards and 2 carries for 22 yards. While I doubt you would use him next week against the Broncos, the Packers' final 2 games, though, are against the Bears and the Ravens. Reed, at the very least, should be a decent depth piece heading into the playoffs. And then next up is going to be Jaden Higgins. The theme continues with wide receivers this week. Jaden Higgins hauled in just 3 of 5 targets for 34 yards for 6 PPR points. This was a tough matchup against the Chiefs on the road on Sunday Night Football. However, upcoming matchup should dictate much better usage against the Cardinals, Raiders, and Chargers to close out the fantasy season. Higgins has been seen 5 or more targets in 6 of his last 7 games, making him a viable flex option in PPR formats moving forward. Next up is going to be Ryan Flournoy, only rostered in 1% of leagues. This is only if CeeDee Lamb misses next week with a concussion. Flournoy had his second 100-yard game this season on Thursday night against the Lions. He finished with 9 catches on 13 targets for 115 yards and a score for 26 PPR points. If CeeDee Lamb misses, Flournoy would be a viable flex option at home against the Vikings. And honestly, with as bad as that concussion looked, I would be pretty surprised if CeeDee Lamb was able to make it back, even with the extra time off. Typically, we just see guys miss at least 1 week, and with how bad that looked, I would be surprised if CD plays in Week 15. So Flournoy, I think, is actually a pretty strong ad this week and one that's widely available in most leagues. Next up is going to be Jalen Coker. For a refresher, in Week 13, Coker had his best fantasy day of the season, securing 4 of 6 targets for 73 yards and a score for 17 PPR points back in Week 13. Now, fresh off their bye, the Panthers will get 2 favorable matchups against the Saints and Bucks. Coker would be a viable ad in deeper leagues and bench depth in 12-team leagues. Lastly is Chimere DK, rostered in 60% of leagues. He's now scored 13 or more PPR points in 4 of his last 7 games. He doesn't offer a massive ceiling, but he certainly looks like the Titans' most dynamic weapon on offense. The Titans face a 49ers defense that's actually allowed the third most receiving yards and the second most touchdowns to slot wide receiver, where DK runs the majority of his routes. So I think you could look there if you're kind of desperate this week at the flex option or at the flex position. Sorry. Now, lastly, I just want to hit on really quickly is Darius Slayton. Coming off their Week 14 bye, the Giants get a very juicy matchup against a Commanders defense that just made J.J. McCarthy look good. Darius Slayton is a viable flex option next week against the Commanders, who allow the fourth most PPR points to wide receivers and have really struggled against outside wide receivers where Darius Slayton plays. So, again, if you're looking for a flex option for this week, is widely available. Darius Slayton might be your guy. Let's keep it moving here. Let's move over to the tight end position, which I think is the juiciest of them all of this weekend. At first, it's going to be Harold Fannin. Fannin continues to be the top target for Shedeur Sanders. Today, he caught 8 of 11 passes for 114 yards and a score for 25 PPR points. This was Fannin's first career 100-yard game. Something to keep in mind on this week is David Njoku, who left with a knee injury. Either way, Fannin gets a very good matchup next up against the Bears, who allow the 12th most PPR points to tight end. Fannin is a priority waiver ad if he's sitting out there in your league. It doesn't sound like David Njoku has been dealing with this knee injury now for the past 2 or 3 weeks. It sounds like there's a chance he could miss next week. But even if he doesn't, I still think Fannin is a strong play because he looks like the preferred target for Shedeur Sanders. So let's keep moving here. Let's move over to Isaiah Likely, only rostered in 8% of leagues. And after being pretty quiet for most of the year, Isaiah Likely has really started to come on in recent weeks. He's now scored 12 or more PPR points in back-to-back games. Today, he actually caught 4 of 6 for 25 yards and a score. He actually should have had a better day that he had, but he after what was a touchdown that was knocked out of his hands, even though he got 2 feet down. But they ruled that he lost possession, so he actually should have had a second touchdown today. But either way, I think Likely gets next up, Likely gets the best possible matchup with a rematch against the Bengals. And their last matchup 2 weeks ago, Likely had 5 receptions for 95 yards. The Bengals, as we know, are the worst defense in the league against tight ends, and most primarily the backup tight end, because the number 2 tight end is actually the one that absolutely crushes against them. And so Isaiah Likely is, I think, an incredible play this week. And honestly, I probably would have him as a better play than Harold Fannin, just because I think the run out, the matchup is incredible here. And he gets a much better matchup where Fannin, I know the Bears, like I've said, aren't great against tight ends, but it is still a tougher matchup on the road. And there's going to be ups and downs with Shedeur Sanders. So I think Likely is probably your best bet for a waiver ad this week at tight end. And then a couple other ones, Darren Waller. The Dolphins steamrolled the Jets today after Tyrod Taylor left early in the first quarter. The Dolphins never really needed to throw the ball after that, as he was the only target at 3 times. Waller gets back-to-back great matchups, though, against the Steelers, who allow the 6th most fantasy points. And then in Week 16, he faces the Bengals, who allow the most fantasy points to tight ends. I think Waller will be a high-end tight end, too, this week. Lastly, A.J. Barner. Rookie Elijah Arroyo left with a knee injury. Now, what's notable about that is Arroyo actually was playing 41% of the snaps this season. So this should allow Barner to see even more of a full-time role on passing downs. And the Seahawks actually have the 5th easiest remaining schedule for tight ends through the fantasy playoffs. So if you're in a deeper league where there's not a lot of tight ends sitting out there or a lot of depth, I think A.J. Barner is definitely a spot you can look at. He's rostered less than 10% of leagues. And like I said, this Arroyo injury is probably going to be huge. We also had some other injuries today, like Zach Ertz. I think it's probably going to be Jake Bates. I think you could see them maybe go to Ben Sinnott who they drafted last year pretty high. I think it was a second or third round pick last year. Just hasn't really gotten a whole lot of run. But Zach Ertz looks like he tore his ACL. His career might be over after this one. I mean, he is getting up there in age. I hate to see that with him. So, and then also some other guys like Theo Johnson, who's right there around 50% roster and stuff like that. So, also Patty Fry, I think is another one you could look at. Washington, their big 300-pound tight end, he left with an injury today, so it kind of opens things up a little bit more for Patty Fry against the Dolphins, who struggle against tight ends as well. So jump over to if there's any questions here. Yeah, we got a few things here. Does Daniel Jones being out impact JT's fantasy production? Yes, it is going to 100% affect Jonathan Taylor's fantasy production. He is not going to be the same guy that he was. I'm not saying there won't be a matchup or two, or maybe he can get there. They're going to try to be extremely run heavy. I know people are going to expect that maybe Anthony Richardson is going to be coming back. From all reports today, Anthony Richardson is nowhere close to being ready to return. It sounds like that injury he suffered was absolutely brutal, and it does not sound like he's going to be back anytime soon. So you're looking at Riley Leonard right now as being their starting quarterback, he is somebody who offers some rushing upside, but there's no way this is not going to hurt Jonathan Taylor's fantasy production, because he's just not going to be someone that's going to be able to score as many touchdowns like he did earlier in the year. So absolutely hate to see it for Daniel Jones, and honestly, it's kind of malpractice that he was even out there. These things tend to happen for players whenever they have lower body injuries, like he's had. He's been playing through a fractured fibula, so you're trying to compensate for that injury, and then something like this happens. Like if he was a franchise quarterback, he never would be playing through something like that. So because he was on a 1-year deal, they thought they could push it through. But hate to see it, because Daniel Jones, at least earlier in the year, was looking really good. Is it time to consider starting Corum over Kyron in fantasy if you have both on the roster? I don't want to get too over my head. Like, I think you're still going to play Kyron, but obviously, Corum looked incredible here in that game. But I mean, you could, depending on matchup, like play both, I guess, if you absolutely wanted to. But that's probably a little bit crazy. Not something you probably would want to do. But I don't know if I could play Corum. I know Corum has been running really hot recently, and obviously had a huge day today. But I think it would be tough to trust playing Kyron, because Kyron still is going to get opportunities, still going to get usage. The problem is this is kind of turned into like the Bears situation with DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, where I think this is going to be like a 50-50 split moving forward. So I have $2 of fab left for waiver wire. I have Lamb and Ertz on my roster. Potential replacements would be Watson, Godwin, Sutton. I have Waller as a replacement for Ertz. Continued on next message. Would you be put remaining to pick up Fannin or split the bid? I mean, if you only have $2 left, I mean, you're probably going to get outbid. To be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to, I would probably just put it on Fannin and hope for the best at that point. I don't know how many like how much you guys use. Most leagues are like $100 fab, but yeah, I mean, if you can, but also I would kind of look at. I mean, there's quite a few different options. I think you can look at a tight end, like we just talked about. Even like an AJ Barner if you're absolutely desperate, or Patty Fry if he's sitting out there, you could definitely look at there as well. But obviously Isaiah Likely is the one that's most widely available, and he's probably the one that I would actually want, because he gets an incredible matchup this week. And obviously now we're in the fantasy playoffs, and we're trying to do whatever we can to win. So it's not so much about trying to stash players and stuff like that as much as we're just going for whoever might be the best option. Kanoa, aloha. Should I activate Hampton and drop Vidal, Tracy, Pearsall, or Dowdle for him? I mean, if I had to drop somebody, it'd probably be Ricky Pearsall at this point. We've seen absolutely nothing. And it's possible coming off their bye and stuff like this that maybe he gets a little bit more involved down the stretch. But with Hampton, I probably want to hold Vidal. Coming off an injury like that, I still would like to hold Vidal. I think Tracy, if he's good to go and able to play this week, which sounds like that there's a real possibility of that being the case, I probably would still like to have him. And then Dowdle, yeah, I don't want to drop him. I know Chuba is coming off a huge game, so if I had to drop somebody, depending on what your wide receivers look like, I'd probably drop Ricky Pearsall to activate Hampton here. But I would expect it'd be probably more of a 50-50 split between Hampton and Vidal, opening things up. And at the very least, I know their offensive line is completely banged up, But the good news for Hampton tomorrow will be the fact um, that they're missing Jalen Carter. That's a huge blow to their run game. When he's out, they tend to get run all over. So I actually think Hampton's in a pretty good spot tomorrow. But we'll just have to see what that run out looks like, and the usage will look like here in that game. It's kind of a it's kind of a it'll be Hampton. I would go with Hampton. I think he's probably going to be the early down guy. I still think that, I mean, he probably gets worked in. It might be a 50-50 split, but do you think JT finishes a top 5 running back in fantasy? Like, overall, will he finish, like, by the season's end? Probably, because he was playing so well, but, like, from now till then, no, I wouldn't view him as a top 5 running back, I think, the rest of the way, with this injury. I mean, he's still top 10 for sure, just because usage is still going to be there for him, and they're obviously still fighting for a playoff spot, but it's just an overall downgrade for Jonathan Taylor with what the situation is going to look like, and then I mean, the Colts schedule is not great moving forward. It's not terrible, but I mean, but I will say, like, next week against the Seahawks, like, I'm not excited to play Jonathan Taylor on the road against the Seahawks and that defense. That defense has been absolutely phenomenal. And Riley Leonard getting his first start, likely going to be Riley Leonard, and his first start on the road in Seattle. And then San Francisco is not a terrible matchup against San Francisco at home. And then they get the Jaguars, who have been a very good run defense as well. So it's just not great rest of season for JT. But at this point, there's nothing you can really do because obviously the trade deadline's passed. You can't really do anything else about it, and just hope for the best for Jonathan Taylor. Dowdle or Tracy week 15? I mean, if Tracy was good to go, I haven't really thought through everything yet with all this, like, put my rankings together. So I really would rather do that than try to answer that. But I probably would go with Dowdle. I know that it was frustrating with him with Chuba Hubbard losing touch to him, but I still think that they want to be run heavy, and I still think that Dowdle is probably the early down back. And the game script against the Rams, I think, dictated them to use more Chuba Hubbard. I would bet against the Saints, he's probably going to be more involved. I think he has a higher chance of scoring a touchdown in that game. So I probably would lean Dowdle, even though it's a better matchup for Tracy. So that being said, that's all the questions. Hope everybody got through this week at least relatively clean with injuries. We didn't have any like major injuries to the like position players, stuff like that. So that's a plus. Obviously, quarterback position is brutal. Obviously, there's going to be residual effects to some of these injuries at quarterback. That's going to hurt some other places, like we were talking about Jonathan Taylor. But overall, it could have been worse with in terms of injuries overall. We got through it relatively cleanly for the most part. Now we are on to the fantasy playoffs. So all now we're trying to do is win each week to get ourselves to the fantasy championship. So keep it locked in here. If you have any questions, be sure to drop in the comment section below. We'll see you on the next one.